Before we start, I would just like to say that this video is not about if elemental damage is a good or a bad stat. It's more of a tool to help you better understand how it works. Let's begin. What the fuck? There is no diminishing return on percent elemental damage. However, there is a diminishing return on how effective it is. Let me explain. Let's say you have 100 damage and you get 20% fire elemental damage on your amulet. Your fire skills now deal 120 damage. That is a damage increase of 20%. Now, let's say you get another 20% elemental damage on your bracers. You now have 40% fire elemental damage, giving you a total of 140 damage. At first glance, it seems that the 20% from the amulet and the 20% from the bracers are both giving you equal value for your stats. Which is somewhat true. They both give you 20 extra damage, but if you look at the increase to your total damage, we realize something interesting. When we go from 20% to 40%, the last 20% we get from the bracers are actually giving us a DPS increase of 16.6% and not 20% like the amulet did. This becomes even more apparent when we push it to the very extreme of stacking elemental damage. Let's say we get 20% from the weapon Devastator, 20% from the shield Lightless Wall, 20% from the helmet Andariel's Visage, 40% from Ring 2 Stone of Yoda Rings, 20% from the gloves Mage Fist, 20% from the chest piece Syndicote, 20% from any legendary bracers, and 20% from any legendary amulet. This gives you a total of 180%. 180% is the highest possible you can stack fire elemental damage. When you do this, the last 20% you get is actually giving you a damage increase of only 7.7%. But even if you dial it back to a bit more reasonable scenario, the difference is quite noticeable. In this scenario, the last 20% gives us a damage increase of 11.1%. Let's say you get a pretty badly rolled Mage Fist drop. The tooltip says you would lose 15% damage if you equip them. However, you're a fire wizard and the 20% extra fire elemental damage that isn't included in the item comparison should make up for the 15% you lose and have you end up with a damage increase of 5%. This would be true if you had no other fire elemental damage anywhere else on your gear. But in this example, you have 20% on your bracers and 15% on your amulet, giving you a total of 35% fire elemental damage. So what you need to do is to divide your new total fire elemental damage with the Mage Fist to your old total fire elemental damage without the Mage Fist. This will give you the actual damage increase from the 20% on the Mage Fist, 14.8%. That's the actual damage increase we'll get from the Mage Fist's 20% fire elemental damage. So in this specific case with our horribly rolled Mage Fist, we'll be losing 0.2% damage, where at first glance we would gain 5% damage. Damage increase to elites and damage increase to skills work the same way as elemental damage, and they do not have any diminishing effect on each other. The math behind the scenes look like this: your sheet DPS times elemental damage times elite damage times skill damage. So let's say you have 100 sheet damage with 20% elemental damage, 20% elite damage and 20% skill damage. This gives you a total damage of 172.8. Now let's say you only have 60% elemental damage instead of 20 in each. Total damage of 160. Interesting. I hope you understand elemental damage a bit better now. And just remember to take your new total elemental damage divided by your old total elemental damage, and you will get the damage increase from your new item's elemental damage. That's it for today. Feel free to check out my other video about area damage, and if there's anything in Diablo you don't quite understand, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll see if I can make a video to explain it to you. And remember, stay strong.